Welcome to Apply IT. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to handle errors while making API call using await keyword. In our previous video, we learned in which situations we need to use await keyword. If you are new and you are not aware, this is the 7th video in the series on JavaScript promises, where we try to understand advanced JavaScript concepts practically. If you haven't watched those videos, do watch those videos, then come back to this video for better understanding and clarity. You can find links for those videos in the video description. So let's jump into today's topic, handling errors while making API call using await keyword. In our previous video, we created two API functions. One is get parent email and the second is send email. So this API is succeeding by returning a resolved promise. Now to demonstrate how to handle errors, we need to make simulation of this API returns rejected promise. For that we write here call to reject. So this get parent email will return rejected promise after 3 seconds. Now let's understand that how we are going to make call to that function. So there are two ways to make call to that API. One is using then and catch callbacks, and the second is using await keyword. So let's understand coding pattern when we go with then and catch callbacks. So here we write that API call get parent email, we pass some student ID as input, then we write then and catch callbacks. So here we are providing callback that will be executed when API is successful, that we supply to the then function, and we provide second callback that will be executed when API is failing, so that we pass to this catch function. So let's understand this practically. So let's go to Google Chrome. So first we write API function that returns resolved promise. Now we write code to understand how to call this API function using then and catch callback. We write then and catch callback, which will be executed once API is returning response, either success or failure. So in this case, we'll get success response. So after some time, we will get response. So here we are getting parent's email ID after 3 seconds. Now we are writing API function, which is returning a rejected promise after 3 seconds. And we make call to this API function with then and catch callbacks. So in this case, we are going to get error response after 3 seconds. So observe that after how much time we get response. So we can see that we are getting this error condition after 3 seconds. So that was using then and catch callback. Now when we use this await keyword in front of this API call, so in this situation we get a response into this result variable. But now the question is how to handle error while using await keyword. So in our previous video we assumed the success condition, but what if the API is failing? So let's understand coding pattern for this situation. So coding pattern when using await keyword will be to use try and catch block. So we wrap call to API function using await in the try block, and we handle error condition in the catch block. So in this situation, if API call is successful, we'll display response in this console log, and if API is failing, it is returning a rejected promise that is going to throw an exception, and that exception we are handling in this catch block. So when we use this await keyword, we handle error using catch block. So let's understand this practically. We have this get parent email which is failing, and let's make call to that using await keyword. We observe that we got response after 3 seconds. So let's compare these two coding patterns. On the left hand side, we make API call with getting response in then and catch callbacks. And on the right hand side, we make call to API function using await keyword. So practically we observed that the end result was same. We were getting response after 3 seconds in both the cases. But there is a difference between these two ways. If you put some logic after call to API with then and catch callback, we'll find that this following logic will be executed in asynchronous manner, which means that even before this API call has executed, the following statement will be executed. Whereas in the second case where we use this await keyword, here the execution will be synchronous. That is, this some logic will not be executed until the call to this get parent email is returning response. Now let's consider another API, send email, which is simulating that we are sending an email to the recipient email. So this API will return response after 3 seconds, and we make that this API is succeeding. So now we have two API functions. One is get parent email, which is returning rejected promise, and the other is send email, which is returning resolved promise. And now we try to use response of one API as an input to another API. And here we are writing coding pattern using then and catch callbacks. You can see here we create a wrapper function called send email to parent, which takes student ID. We print it on console log. Then we make call to this first API called get parent email. We have written then and catch callbacks for that method. And once we get response of the first API call here, we print it. We print that parent's email, and we make call to the second API called send email. And again we write then and catch callbacks for that method. If you look at this coding pattern, we find that we make first API call, then in the then callback of the first API, we are making another API call. Again, for that API call, we need to write then and catch callback. So here we find that we are writing code which is nested. So this is called as a nesting. So when we go for then and catch callback, if you are making multiple API calls in which output of one API is required as an input to the another API, we need to write code in form of nesting. So for say two API calls, it may be easy to understand, but if we go beyond two API calls, we find that this nested coding is difficult to understand. And that is the reason that this await keyword was introduced. So let's understand this practically. So we write second API function called send email. Then we write a wrapper function which is going to call first API. We'll get a response of that in the then callback. Then we'll supply that output as an input to the second API call. So let's call it. So we get error in get parent email that it is not found. So we can observe that if first API call is failing, so in that situation we are failing the first API call, that is this one. So because it was failing, the catch block was getting executed and it was printing this error message. The second API call we were making in the then callback of the first API call. So that was not getting executed because the first API call get failed. So the point is that we should be very careful while writing code using then and catch callback in a situation where we are going to use nesting. Now let's understand coding pattern when using await keyword. So we try to do the same thing but now using await keyword. So coding pattern is like this. We wrap the call to these API functions, both the API functions in try block, and in catch block we handle error. So first we make call to the first API, we pass student ID as an input, then we use await keyword, we'll get a response. If this API call is failing, then it's going to throw an exception which we'll handle in this catch block. Once we get this parent email, as a success response of this, we display it on console. Then we pass that as an input to the second API call called send email. We get an email status and we display it on a console. So in this situation, we are making first API call, then second API call. So here we are not using any nesting. So nesting is not required in this situation. And you can see that this code is easy to understand as compared to this code where we have nesting. So let's understand this practically. So here we have written code which is using await keyword and we make call to API one after another. So we are passing output of the first API call as an input to the second API call. And now we call to this wrapper function called send email to parent and we pass one student ID as an input. And we find that we are getting same result. So in this example, we are using await keyword. We are not using then and catch callback. So our code is very easy to understand. So to summarize, when we make an API call using await keyword, we handle errors using catch block. And when we have a situation where we pass output of one API as an input to another API call, then if you go for then and catch callbacks, then that requires nesting and our code is difficult to understand. Whereas if you go for await keyword, then coding pattern is easy to understand because we do not need to use any nesting and our code is concise. So in this video, we have understood that if API is failing, then how to handle those error conditions when we make call to API using await keyword. Do let me know in the comment section how this video was useful to you, and thanks for watching and happy learning. We'll see you in the next video.